What would you do if a 14-year-old girl in a faded gray Nike hoodie walked into Judge Caprio's courtroom looking angry, cold, and completely done with the world, and then said one sentence so devastating that even the judge had to stop and look away? Drop a comment telling us whether you think justice should always make room for mercy, because this story starts with a routine case number and ends with a courtroom no one in Providence would ever forget. It was 9:12 on a Thursday morning, the kind of November cold that makes every breath feel sharp, and the monitor above the clerk's desk flashed a case that looked ordinary enough. City of Providence v. Alina Vega, case number PMC 2511487. Hit that subscribe button if you believe the smallest cases can hide the biggest truths, because what happened next turned a stack of parking violations into the kind of moment millions would replay with tissues in hand. The courtroom at 325 Washington Street had the same familiar sounds it always had: papers sliding, shoes scraping, the soft cough of people waiting for their turn. A bailiff named Teresa Malone stood near the side door in her Navy uniform, hands folded, watching the room with that practiced expression officers get after years of seeing every kind of excuse. Like this video, if you believe first impressions can be dead wrong, because almost everyone in that room got this child wrong before she ever opened her mouth. At the defense table sat Alina Vega, 36, in burgundy scrubs and a black puffer jacket from Target that still had a laundry crease in the sleeve. Beside her sat her daughter, Marisol Vega, 14 years old, skinny in the way illness can make a kid look older and younger at the same time, left leg stretched stiffly forward, one black Converse unlaced, hospital band still around her wrist. Share this with someone who needs to see what compassion looks like under pressure, because within minutes the mood in that room was going to break clean in half. Marisol didn't look grateful to be there. She didn't look scared either. She looked irritated. Her arms were folded tight across her chest. Her jaw kept shifting like she was grinding back pain. A pink thread bracelet hung from her wrist next to the hospital band. When the clerk, Paula Mendes, read the list of citations, Marisol rolled her eyes once, and that single motion was enough to turn half the gallery against her. There were 6 parking violations, 2 late penalties, 1 towing charge, and an administrative hold that put Alina's license at risk. Total owed $842.60. The citations all came from the same area over a 9-week span: the drop-off lane near the Pediatric Oncology entrance at Hasbro Children's Hospital, and twice the loading zone near the infusion unit on Plain Street. The city's file said the blue 2011 Honda CR-V had repeatedly obstructed access and ignored posted limits. To the people sitting in the back row, it looked simple. Rules were rules. People abused medical loading zones all the time. Everybody had a story. Everybody had a reason. A heavy-set man in a Carhartt cap whispered to his wife that his own meter ticket got no sympathy last month. A woman holding a Dunkin' cup shook her head when Marisol stared straight ahead instead of at the judge. You could feel the room judging the child before the judge ever did. Then Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses, looked down at the file, and spoke in that calm tone that made people quiet without trying. "Ms. Vega," he said, glancing from mother to daughter, "I see multiple citations here and not just one bad day. Tell me what happened." Alina opened her mouth, but Marisol beat her to it. "What happened," she said, her voice flat and edged, "is we kept getting punished for trying not to be late." A few people in the gallery exhaled sharply at that. It sounded rude. It sounded rehearsed. It sounded like the kind of smart answer that makes a bad situation worse. Alina touched her daughter's arm, whispering, "Mommy," softer. But Marisol kept her eyes on the bench. Judge Caprio didn't snap back. He didn't rush. He just leaned slightly forward. Late for what? Marisol hesitated, and for the first time the room saw it. Not attitude, not arrogance, calculation. The kind of pause someone takes when deciding how much of their humiliation they're willing to hand to strangers. "For chemo," she said. The room didn't go silent all at once. It happened in layers. The whispering stopped. The Dunkin' cup lowered. Teresa Malone shifted her weight by the door. Elena looked at the table like she wished it would swallow her whole. Judge Caprio's eyes moved to the hospital band on Marisol's wrist, then to the stiff way her left leg was positioned. And still, somehow, that wasn't the moment that hit hardest. Because Judge Caprio asked the next question in the same measured tone. "You are the patient." Marisol nodded once. "Stage 2 osteosarcoma, left femur, diagno." Said June 19th. "We come in 3 times a week when it gets bad." Now the entire room was looking at her. Really looking. The hoodie. The moon-pale face. The thinning hair tucked under a black beanie even indoors. The port line outline under the fabric near her collarbone. Things everyone had missed because they were so busy deciding what kind of girl she was. Judge Caprio glanced back at the file. "These tickets are in your mother's name." "Because it's my mom's car," Marisol said, "but I'm why we were there." Elena finally found her voice. It came out shaky and tired. "Your Honor, I work nights in laundry at Rhode Island Hospital. I get off at 6:30 a.m. Some mornings we go straight from my shift to her appointments. I tried to move the car. Sometimes they take her in early. Sometimes she throws up before I can get back downstairs. Sometimes I thought I had 5 minutes and I didn't." The city representative that morning was a younger attorney named Mark Leland, hair neat, tie too bright, carrying the kind of confidence people bring to cases they expect to win in 7 minutes. He stood and cleared his throat. "Your Honor, with respect, the city is sympathetic, but the pattern matters. The vehicle was cited repeatedly in a marked no parking medical access lane. The issue isn't one isolated emergency. It's repeat noncompliance." And there it was, the dry language, pattern matters, repeat noncompliance. The way suffering gets translated into paperwork until it stops sounding human at all. Judge Caprio turned back to Elena. "Did you contact the court earlier?" Elena swallowed. "I missed the first hearing. I was at the hospital when my phone died. Then I missed the rescheduled date because she had a fever of 104 and they admitted her. I know how that sounds." "It sounds," Marisol muttered, not quietly enough, "like no one cares unless you collapse in front of them." A few heads turned again. There was that edge, that spark that could make viewers argue in the comments. Was she hurting? Yes. Was she still sharp? Absolutely. And Judge Caprio noticed it too. "Marisol," he said gently, "I understand you're frustrated, but help me understand everything. Don't make me pull it out of you piece by piece." She looked up then, really looked at him, and something in her face changed. Not softness yet, but recognition. He wasn't dismissing her. He was asking her to trust him with the full weight. She took a breath and said, "If I tell you everything, people in here are going to feel stupid." No one moved. Not the clerk, not the city attorney, not the people in the gallery. This was the kind of line that makes a room brace before it even knows why. If you've ever seen a moment where the truth walks in before the evidence catches up, you know that feeling. Hit like if you've ever watched someone be misunderstood until one sentence changed everything, because the next few minutes were brutal. Judge Caprio didn't flinch. "Go ahead." Marisol unfolded a piece of paper from her hoodie pocket. It was creased, soft at the edges from being opened too many times. At first people assumed it was a speech she had practiced. It was. It was a list, dates, times, notes written in purple ink and pencil. June 19, biopsy. July 3, first chemo. July 28, ER vomiting after infusion. August 14, missed school orientation. September 6, towed with nausea bag still in the back seat. September 27. Mom cried in garage. October 2, late fee. October 9, port infection scare. She didn't read dramatically. She read like someone inventorying damage because nobody else had bothered. "This one," she said, tapping the second citation, "was 8:41 a.m. We were supposed to check in at 8:30. My white count was low and Dr. Feld said if we were late they'd debump us. My mom parked near the side entrance because I couldn't put weight on my leg that morning. She left the hazard lights on. She ran me in. By the time she came back, ticket. She moved to the next date. This one was because I threw up in the elevator and she had to clean me up before moving the car. Ticket. Then the next. This one was when they changed my meds and I got dizzy and fell trying to stand. Ticket. And then her voice tightened on the date that changed the room. This one was when they towed us. Elena pressed her lips together so hard they blanched. Teresa Malone looked toward the city table. Mark Leland's pen stopped moving. Judge Caprio asked, very quietly, what happened when the vehicle was towed? Marisol didn't answer right away. She looked at her mother first, as if asking permission to tear the bandage off in public. Elena nodded without looking up. We came out of the hospital and the car was gone, Marisol said. My mom thought it was stolen. Then somebody at the desk said tow truck. She had $43 in her checking account. The anti-nausea meds were in the glove box. My blanket was in the back. My leg brace too. We took the bus to the tow yard. If the story had ended there, it already would have been enough to break people. But the truth kept coming. It took an hour and 19 minutes, Marisol said. I know because I kept looking at the time on the wall. She described the tow yard on Allen's Avenue with the precision of someone who had replayed it in her head while trying to sleep. The chain-link fence rattling in the wind, diesel in the air, sodium lights buzzing overhead because by the time they got there, evening had dropped early. A red tow truck with a dented rear panel idling near the gate. Elena begging the clerk behind the dirty glass to release the Honda because her daughter's medications were inside. A sign that said storage fees accrue daily at the bottom of a cracked window. Marisol said the man at the yard, Nick Bellamy, never raised his voice. That almost made it worse. He just kept repeating policy. Payment first. Release after. No exceptions. She said he wore a tan Dickies jacket and smelled like cigarettes when he came out from the office to explain it a second time. She remembered details people only remember when they're scared. My mom asked if she could at least get my medicine bag, Marisol said. He said not until payment cleared. The woman with the Dunkin' cup covered her mouth. Judge Caprio's expression changed, but it didn't explode. It settled. Anyone who watched him long enough knew that look. Calm getting sharper, mercy turning into scrutiny. Mark Leland stood again, cautious now. Your Honor, the city is not defending any private tow yard conduct beyond authorized removal under ordinance. The citations are separate from. Judge Caprio lifted one hand and the attorney stopped. I understand what is separate on paper, counselor. I am trying to understand what was connected in reality. That line landed in the room like a brick dropped into still water. People would repeat it later. They always do when justice sounds bigger than procedure. Then he asked the question that changed the case from sad to explosive. Was there any documentation presented to the issuing officer regarding your daughter's treatment? Elena nodded quickly. We had an appointment slip on the dashboard the first 2 times, then a nurse note in the windshield on the 4th. I thought that was enough. Mark Leland checked the city packet. The photographs attached to Citation 3 do not show a visible permit or placard. Marisol laughed once with no humor in it. Because the photo shows the bumper and plate, not the windshield. Now you could feel outrage building in the gallery. A real, rolling kind of anger. Not because rules existed, but because suddenly everyone understood how easily a camera angle and a citation log could flatten a family's emergency into a technical violation. Judge Caprio asked Paula Mendes to pull up the attached images on the courtroom monitor. One by one, the still photos appeared. Blue Honda CR-V hazard lights flashing in one shot, rear plate, side angle, curb paint. None of them showed the dashboard. None showed the front seat. None showed the hospital bag Elena said she left visible. None showed a child limping out of frame. And that would have been enough to raise doubt. But then Judge Caprio asked if there was responding officer footage from the tow yard incident mentioned in the supplemental note attached to Citation 6. Mark Leland blinked. Supplemental note. Paula found it buried under the final notice. Short, dry, almost invisible. Providence police responded to civil dispute at Bellamy Towing, 1822 hours. No arrests. Scene cleared. That was when people started leaning forward, because now it wasn't just about tickets. It was about what happened after. It was about what somebody saw and wrote down. And everyone in that room knew the same thing at once. If there was body cam, the whole story might look very different. If you think paperwork can hide pain until video pulls the mask off, drop a comment right now. Because Judge Caprio was about to order something no one expected from a parking hearing. He asked the bailiff to contact the clerk's office and determine whether police body camera footage from the Allens Avenue tow yard response had been retained. Teresa Malone nodded and stepped out, radio crackling softly against her shoulder. The room stayed suspended in that strange court silence where nothing moves but everything changes. While they waited, Judge Caprio looked back at Marisol. "How old are you exactly?" 14. I turned 14 on August 23rd. "Did you miss school because of treatment?" She shrugged like it didn't matter. "I missed a lot." Alina jumped in. She was supposed to start 9th grade at Classical High. She did orientation online from a hospital bed. Marisol rolled her eyes again, but this time the gesture felt different. Protective. Embarrassed that her mother was letting strangers see the parts she worked hardest to hide. Judge Caprio noticed, "You don't like people talking. And gee, about what this has taken from you." "No," Marisol said, "because then they start looking at me like I'm already gone." That line hit harder than any tear could have. Nobody wrote anything for a second. Nobody coughed. Even Mark Leland stared at the table. Judge Caprio's voice softened. "And are you?" Marisol answered without blinking. "No, but I got real tired of everybody charging us as if we are." That was the first time Alina broke. Her shoulders shook once. Then again. She pulled a tissue from her sleeve because she clearly hadn't planned to cry in public and had come prepared anyway. The sound in the room wasn't sobbing. It was the smaller sound people make when they're trying not to let grief fully show. Then Teresa Malone returned. "There is footage," she said. "One responding officer. 11 minutes, 26 seconds. It's available through the city portal." The room changed temperature. Paula Mendes connected the file to the courtroom monitor. There was no dramatic music, no television-style reveal, just the choppy beginning of bodycam video and the harsh audio of a windy evening at the tow yard, but the effect was nuclear. The first frame showed the Bellamy towing office under fluorescent light, chain-link shadows cutting across the ground. You could hear Alina before you could see her. Her voice was thin with panic, saying, "Please, I'm not asking for the car, just the bag, please. Her medication is in the front seat." Then the officer turned, and there was Marisol on the footage, smaller than she looked in court, leaning against a fence, one hand on her left thigh, the other holding a blue vomit basin from the hospital. The gallery gasped as one. Body cam changes everything when truth has been living off camera. That's why moments like this go viral, because people can argue with a person, but they can't so easily argue with what a lens captures in raw time. Nick Bellamy appeared in frame. Same tan jacket Marisol described. Same flat voice. "Ma'am, I told you, if I let you take items before payment, everybody claims there's medicine in the car." Alina said, "She has cancer." Nick answered, "I'm sorry to hear that, but policy is policy." And then came the part that made two women in the back row openly cry. Marisol stepped toward the officer filming and said, not dramatically, not theatrically, just exhausted, "Can you please tell him my anti-nausea pills are in the glove box because I'm trying not to throw up on his shoes?" No one in the courtroom moved. On the video, The responding officer asked Bellamy if he could retrieve the medication bag as a humanitarian exception pending payment. Bellamy refused. Then the officer, to his credit, turned to Alina and said he would personally accompany her to verify the items if management approved. Bellamy still refused until a supervisor arrived. 8 minutes later in the footage, after more pleading, a plastic pharmacy bag was finally brought out. 8 minutes. For some people, that's a blink. For a nauseated child post-chemo in a windy lot, it can feel like a lifetime. Judge Caprio asked for the video to be paused. He removed his glasses, set them down, looked at nothing for a moment, not because he had no words, because he was choosing the right ones. Then he said, "The law should never become an obstacle course for a sick child trying to get home." That was quote number 1. The kind people clipped and shared before the hour was over. Mark Leland stood again, visibly less comfortable now. "Your Honor, while the city can acknowledge the disturbing nature of that interaction, the underlying citations still involve restricted access." Judge Caprio cut in, not sharply but with steel. "Counselor, mercy without facts is weakness. Facts without mercy are cruelty. I now have both." Another line, another one people would remember. But the twists were not finished, not even close. Because Paula Mendes then spoke up from the clerk's desk and said there was also a document submitted that morning at 8:56 by email from a Jasmine Patel, RN, Pediatric Oncology. It had not yet been added to the physical file. She printed it and handed it up. Judge Caprio read silently for several seconds. His face tightened. He read aloud. "To whom it may concern, I am writing on behalf of my patient, Marisol Vega, and her mother, Alina Vega. On September 6 and on October 2, I personally observed Ms. Vega arrive in acute distress with her daughter, who was unable to ambulate independently due to post-infusion pain and swelling in the left femur. On one occasion, I placed a handwritten note on the dashboard requesting temporary medical consideration. When Ms. Vega later returned to the unit visibly shaken, she stated the vehicle had been towed. I can confirm the family has attended treatment reliably under extreme hardship." Extreme hardship. Those two words hung in the room like a verdict all by themselves. Alina whispered. "Jasmine stayed after shift to write that." Marisol stared at her hands. Judge Caprio looked toward Mark Leland. "Is the city aware of any grace protocol for active pediatric oncology patients during loading zone emergencies?" The attorney hesitated. "Not a formal one, Your Honor." "Then perhaps that is part of the problem." At that point, the outrage moment had fully landed. But viral stories don't explode unless the emotional engine keeps evolving. This one did. Because just when everyone thought they understood the shape of the injustice, another woman stood up from the back row and asked, trembling, if she could say something. Teresa Malone glanced at the bench. Judge Caprio nodded. The woman stepped forward, holding a worn leather folder. Her name was Tasha Green, a single mother from Cranston whose son had been in outpatient cardiology upstairs from oncology. She had a ticket from the same medical access lane, same tow contractor, similar timeline. She said she never challenged it because she assumed no one would listen. After seeing Marisol on the body cam, she couldn't sit quietly anymore. Then a retired Navy machinist named Leonard Pike lifted his hand and said his disabled wife's oxygen tank had once been delayed inside their towed sedan because he couldn't pay the release fee until the next morning. He still had the receipt. Same yard, same signage, same policy. Now the case was bigger than one family. Now it had layers, multiple victims, different ages, different backgrounds, same machine, same indifference. Everyone in the room knew they were watching a moment that had already outgrown the original case number. The kind of moment that would become the most talked-about courtroom clip of the week, not because someone got yelled at, but because an entire system was being exposed through the calm testimony of people too tired to perform. Like this video, if you believe one brave voice can open the door for 10 more. Because Marisol had just stopped being a defendant's daughter and become the person who made everybody else tell the truth. Judge Caprio called a brief recess, but no one really relaxed. Alina sat with both hands over her mouth. Marisol leaned back slowly, wincing as she shifted her leg. Teresa Malone brought her a bottle of water without being asked. Mark Leland stepped into the hallway with his phone pressed to his ear. You could practically see the city recalculating its position in real time. During the recess, a local freelance reporter named Mia Chen, who had originally come to cover municipal backlog, scribbled so fast her pen nearly tore the page. She later said the room felt less like a courthouse and more like the second before a thunderstorm breaks. Everyone knew lightning was coming. No one knew exactly where it would hit. When court resumed, Judge Caprio invited Bellamy Towing's owner or representative to appear if present. To the surprise of almost everyone, Nick Bellamy was there. He had come for another matter and had been sitting 3 rows back since the footage played, shoulders stiff, face drained of color. Teresa Malone escorted him forward. Nick looked different standing at the podium than he had on video, smaller, less certain, mid-40s, shaved head, weathered face, hands rough and red from outdoor work. The tan Dickies jacket was gone. Now he wore a navy quarter-zip with the company logo on the chest. He did not look evil. He looked like a man who had built his life around not bending. Judge Caprio asked him if the video accurately reflected his conduct. Nick said yes. Judge Caprio asked if Bellamy Towing had a written humanitarian retrieval policy for medically necessary items in towed vehicles. Nick said no. Judge Caprio asked whether he disputed the nurse's letter. Nick said no, but he added, "Your Honor, we deal with people lying every day. Sick relative, emergency, dead battery, baby medicine. Everybody says it's urgent. If we start making exceptions, we lose control." Marisol let out a bitter laugh before she could stop herself. Judge Caprio looked at Nick for a long second. "Sir, if your system requires you to treat a child's cancer medication like a scam until proven otherwise, then you have not built control. You have built moral blindness." That line nearly shook the room. Quote number 3. Nick opened his mouth, closed it, and glanced down. Then came a twist no one had seen building under the surface. Judge Caprio turned back to Alina. "I need to ask something difficult. On citation 5, the officer's note says the registered owner had already received notice of pending administrative suspension. Why was the vehicle still in use if there was risk to your license?" Alina's eyes filled instantly. "Because we had no other way to get her there." "That is not the whole answer," Judge Caprio said gently. Marisol went pale. Everybody felt it at once. There was something else, some hidden layer, some choice made in desperation that hadn't yet been admitted. Alina shook her head. "Please." Marisol whispered, Mom." Judge Caprio waited. He didn't press. He let the silence do the work. Finally, Alina said, "I drove after the notice because I had to. But after the second late fee, I got scared. I thought if they suspended me completely and I got stopped, I could lose the car. So one time, I sent Marisol inside with the check-in papers while I circled the block and tried to hide from parking enforcement. She collapsed before I got back." A sound rolled through the gallery, not judgment this time, pain. Marisol spoke before her mother could continue. "I told the nurse I was fine because I knew if they called an ambulance, we'd get another bill." That was the moment the room crossed from sympathy into heartbreak. Because the truth was no longer just that tickets had been unfair or policies had been cold. The truth was that a 14-year-old child with bone cancer had started making tactical financial decisions during medical distress. She wasn't just fighting disease. She was managing the economics of survival. Judge Caprio lowered his head for a second. When he looked up, his eyes had changed. There are some stories that don't hit the ears first. They hit the conscience. He asked Marisol, "Why didn't you tell someone how bad it was getting?" She stared at the microphone like it had personally offended her. Then she said the sentence that made even the stenographer pause. "Because I wasn't scared of the cancer," she said. "I was scared the bills would get there first." That was it. That was the line. People would quote it in comment sections, reaction videos, local radio call-ins, and church sermons by Sunday, because it stripped the whole story down to its ugliest truth. Sometimes the disease isn't the only thing trying to kill a family. Sometimes the paperwork gets there too. Judge Caprio actually leaned back in his chair and looked away. Not for show, not to dramatize. He looked away the way people do when a child has just said something so honest it bypasses all professional armor. The courtroom fell into a silence so complete you could hear the HVAC hum overhead. If you're still here, tell us in the comments what line in this story is hitting you the hardest, because what Marisol said next somehow made it even more devastating. Judge Caprio asked softly, "What were you trying to protect?" Marisol answered, "My mom." "From what?" "From me costing too much." Alina made a sound then that no parent should ever make in public. Not loud. Worse. A broken inhale that sounded like her heart had missed a step. She reached for her daughter with both hands. Marisol resisted for half a second, then folded into her mother awkwardly, careful of the leg, careful of the port, careful of the parts of herself she'd been holding rigid all morning. And right there in front of the bench, the girl who had walked in looking defiant started becoming something else. Not weak, never weak, but open, humble in the rawest way possible. The arrogance had never really been arrogance. It had been armor. Judge Caprio let them have the moment. Then he asked for the issuing officer on citation 3 and 4 to be identified. The city packet listed Officer Daniel Marino, Parking Enforcement Division. By chance or fate, Marino was in the building for another hearing and was brought in 20 minutes later. He entered looking confused, then deeply alarmed as he took in the monitor image paused on the tow yard footage, the nurse letter on the bench, and the faces in the room. Early 30s, clean-shaven, uniform pressed, the kind of city employee nobody notices until something goes wrong. Judge Caprio asked if he remembered the Vega vehicle. Marino hesitated. "Not specifically at first, Your Honor. We handle a high volume, but reviewing the file this morning, yes. I remember the blue CRV near the oncology entrance. I remember the driver was distressed." "Did you observe any indication of medical urgency?" "Yes, Your Honor." A wave moved through the room. "Did you see any note or appointment documentation?" "I saw paper on the dashboard on one occasion," Marino admitted. "I could not verify its authenticity from outside." "Did you exercise discretion?" Marino swallowed. "No, Your Honor." "Why?" And there it was, the consequence moment, the choice under pressure, the part where everyone leans in because now it's not just what happened, it's why. Officer Marino took a breath. Because we had been told there were complaints from ambulance staff about blocked access, we were under directive to cite all repeat violators. No exceptions without permit code. If I started deciding who qualified based on appearances, I was afraid I'd be accused of favoritism. Judge Caprio nodded once. "So you obeyed the instruction?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And did you ever consider that rigid obedience can produce its own kind of injustice?" Marino's face drained. "I do now." That was the moment of realization dialogue shift, clear as day, not defensive, not argumentative, a man hearing the cost of his own neutrality. Marisol looked at him for the first time, not with rage, not even with contempt, just exhaustion, the kind that makes forgiveness possible only because anger takes too much energy. Judge Caprio asked if Marino wished to say anything to the family. The officer turned, hands shaking slightly against the podium. Ms. Vega, Marisol, I'm sorry. That sounds small next to what happened, but I am. I remember thinking you seemed angry. I remember thinking your mother was another person trying to use a bad situation to justify parking wherever she wanted. I saw stress. I didn't see suffering. I should have. Another quote-worthy line, and maybe the most important one for the moral complexity of the story. I saw stress. I didn't see suffering. Marisol nodded once but didn't speak. Then came the next revelation. The one that shifted the story again, just as it risked becoming predictable. Paula Mendes informed the court that another document had arrived during recess from Dr. Adrian Feld, Pediatric Oncology. It was not just a treatment confirmation. It included a prognosis update. Judge Caprio read it in silence longer than before. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than it had been all morning. Dr. Feld states that as of this week, Marisol's tumor has not responded as hoped to the second round of chemotherapy. The care team is evaluating limb salvage surgery versus above-knee amputation later this month. Nobody made a sound. Marisol stared straight ahead. Elena closed her eyes. The room absorbed it in waves. This wasn't just a story about hardship in the past tense. This family wasn't coming out of a storm. They were still standing in it. Judge Caprio looked at Marisol with something beyond sympathy now, respect. And you came here today anyway. She shrugged again, but her voice cracked. Because if they took the car, I didn't know how we'd get to whatever comes next. There it was, the ultimate confrontation point around which everything had been building. Not the tickets, not the tow yard, not the policy, the future, the terror of losing transportation before losing a leg, the unbearable math of American hardship condensed into one child's practical fear. A courtroom, Judge Caprio said slowly, should never be the place where a child has to beg to keep a ride to treatment. Quote number 4. At this point, even the people who came in cynical were gone, melted, transformed. The man in the Carhartt cap had tears in his beard. Mia Chen had stopped pretending to be detached. Teresa Malone looked like she was swallowing her own emotions one disciplined breath at a time. Then something happened that took the story beyond outrage and into grace. Judge Caprio began outlining potential remedies: dismissal of all citations in the interest of justice, referral of the towing matter for review, recommendation of fee reimbursement, and a formal letter to city administration urging emergency medical discretion protocols. It was satisfying. It was deserved. You could feel the gallery ready for that surge of justice served. And Marisol interrupted him. Can I ask for something else? Judge Caprio stopped. You may. She looked at Officer Marino, then at Nick Bellamy, then back at the bench. When she spoke, her tone had completely changed from the sharpness of the opening. This was humility but not submission. Clarity. I don't want this to be one of those stories where everyone claps because I cried and then another family gets the same ticket next week, she said. I don't want them fired just so people feel good for 5 minutes. I want somebody to fix it. That sentence stunned the room in an entirely different way. Because this child, this 14-year-old who had every right to demand punishment, asked instead for prevention. Not revenge, protection, not spectacle, change. Judge Caprio asked, what would fixing it look like to you? Marisol answered with the most mature list anyone in that courtroom heard all year. Let nurses have a number they can call so a car doesn't get towed while a kid is being admitted. Let people get medicine bags out without paying first. Let officers take a picture of the dashboard if there's a medical note instead of pretending they didn't see it. And maybe, she added, voice getting thinner, maybe don't make parents choose between a parking spot and their kid. That was quote number 5, and maybe the best one of all. If you believe real courage is asking for a better system instead of just personal revenge, hit that subscribe button. Because What happened after Marisol said that is the part people still call the most powerful turn in the whole story. Nick Bellamy, the tow yard manager who had been so rigid on the video, asked if he could speak again. No one expected much, maybe a legal disclaimer, maybe a half apology, but he surprised everyone. He said, "Your Honor, I lost my wife 4 years ago, not to cancer, to sepsis after a delayed diagnosis. Since then I have run that yard like rules are the only thing that keep chaos from swallowing everything. I thought if I bent once, I'd be weak forever. Watching that video just now, hearing this girl, I see I wasn't being strong. I was hiding behind policy because policy doesn't ask you to feel anything." It wasn't enough to erase what he'd done, but it was real. He turned to Alina, "I am sorry." Then to Marisol, "You asked for a fix. I can do part of that. Effective today, Bellamy Towing will release medically necessary items immediately in any disputed tow. No payment required first. I'll put it in writing." He could have stopped there, he didn't. "I will also reimburse every fee your family paid on this matter. And if the city permits it, I'll meet with hospital administration within 10 days to create a direct verification line." Nobody clapped. Courtrooms aren't supposed to. But the silence after his words felt louder than applause. Officer Marino then asked to add one thing of his own. He said he would request immediate review of enforcement guidelines around active treatment zones and volunteer for any training that came out of it. "Sometimes," he said, voice unsteady, "the uniform makes you think fairness means sameness. Today I learned fairness can require seeing more." Another shareable line, another shift from shame to accountability. Judge Caprio listened to both men, then looked back at Marisol. "Young lady, I hope you understand something. What you have done here today is larger than your case." She frowned slightly. "I just told the truth." He smiled sadly. "That is larger than most cases." Then came the resolution, deliberate, formal, powerful. Judge Caprio dismissed all 6 citations and all related penalties in the interest of justice. He ordered the administrative hold lifted immediately and directed the clerk to prepare a letter to the traffic division explaining the court's findings. He requested the city review all parking citations issued in the pediatric oncology loading area over the previous 6 months for potential medical hardship flags. He asked the city attorney to confer with hospital administration about creating a same-day medical verification protocol, and he directed that a copy of the bodycam footage and nurse statement be preserved for review regarding towing practices. Then he looked over the bench one last time and said, "Justice is not blind when it opens its eyes to suffering." Quote number 6, the one that would become the headline everywhere. For a moment, the room stayed frozen as if everyone understood instinctively that they had just witnessed a clip people would be sharing by lunchtime. Not because it was angry, because it was human. Because every person there felt that rare collective recognition when a courtroom stops looking like a machine and starts sounding like conscience. But the story still had one more twist, a deeply personal one. As Teresa Malone moved to help Alina gather papers, Marisol spoke again, quieter than before. "There's one more thing." Judge Caprio paused. "Yes." Marisol pulled a small, folded envelope from her hoodie pocket. "I wrote something in case this went bad." She looked embarrassed now, which somehow made it hit even harder. "I wasn't sure if you were going to believe us." Judge Caprio asked if she wanted to read it. She nodded. The letter was written in uneven blue ink on notebook paper torn from a spiral pad. It wasn't polished. It wasn't scripted. That's why it worked. "To whoever decided if we could keep the car," she read. "I know I'm just a kid and maybe this is not how you do court letters. But if my mom loses the car, please understand we are not lazy people. We are tired people. My mom works all night folding sheets that other sick people use. Then she drives me to get poison put in my body so I maybe get more birthdays. If we parked wrong, It was never because we thought we were special. It was because pain doesn't always happen in legal places. By the second sentence, people were already crying. She kept going. I also want to say I know people probably lie to you a lot, so I brought proof. But if proof is still not enough, then I don't know what else to show except my leg and my mom's face. Please don't make her choose between a job and me. She already chose me. That should count for something. There are moments words stop being words and become impact. That was one of them. Judge Caprio didn't say anything immediately. He pressed his lips together and nodded once, as though that was all he trusted himself to do. Elena wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders. Teresa Malone turned away to give them privacy that no one really had left. Mark Leland stared at the floor with the look of a man who had walked in expecting a docket item and walked out carrying a moral lesson. And then, softly, almost to himself, Judge Caprio said, "Pain doesn't always happen in legal places." He repeated it, because it deserved repeating. That is when everyone knew, not suspected, knew. This was going to travel. This was going to be clipped, captioned, shared, debated, replayed, and remembered. Because some courtroom moments are dramatic. A few become history because they reveal something bigger than the people involved. This one showed the exact point where bureaucracy meets suffering and either becomes cruelty or compassion. Share this with someone who thinks small acts of understanding don't matter. Because one judge choosing to listen deeply changed far more than one family's afternoon. The immediate aftermath was almost as emotional as the hearing itself. In the hallway outside Courtroom B, strangers approached Elena with tissues, gas money, phone numbers, prayers, and awkward kindness. Tasha Green hugged her. Leonard Pike slipped a folded $50 bill toward Elena, and she refused until he said, "For the next parking meter you never should have to feed." Even Mia Chen, the reporter, asked if she could tell the story only if the family wanted it told in a way that might protect others, not exploit them. Marisol, who had started the morning with her chin lifted like a challenge, now looked wrung out, not triumphant, not even relieved yet, just emptied. When the adrenaline drains after public honesty, people often look smaller. She did. Her beanie had shifted back enough to show the uneven regrowth near her temple. Her left hand shook slightly from fatigue as she held the envelope. Teresa Malone crouched beside her and asked if she needed a wheelchair to get downstairs. Marisol gave a tired half-smile. "I'm okay." Teresa answered, "You don't always have to be." That line nearly broke Elena all over again. By 2:00 p.m., a clip of the hearing was circulating through local pages. By evening, it had reached national courtroom reaction channels. The comments split the way the internet always does, but the overwhelming majority said the same thing. They had come for a traffic story and stayed because a child had articulated hardship more clearly than most elected officials ever do. One comment got repeated thousands of times. She didn't ask to win. She asked for the next family not to lose. That was the core. That was why the story endured longer than a day. But real transformation isn't proven in the courtroom. It's proven later, after the cameras, after the clip ends, after everyone goes back to real life. 3 weeks later, on December 3, Dr. Feld performed limb salvage surgery at Hasbro instead of amputation. It was 8 hours long. There were complications with swelling, but the margins came back clearer than feared. Elena slept upright in a vinyl chair in room 614 with her sneakers still on because she didn't trust herself to fully rest. Marisol woke angry, nauseous, and alive. Officer Daniel Marino sent a handwritten note through the hospital's social worker. He didn't make it about himself. He didn't ask forgiveness. He just wrote, "Thank you for teaching me that seeing the rule is not the same as seeing the person. I am trying to do better with what you gave me." Tucked inside was a card to a meal delivery service, unsigned beyond his first name. Nick Bellamy kept his word too. Bellamy Towing posted a new retrieval policy by the office window and online. Medically necessary items would be released immediately upon verification. No payment required first. It was a small policy in a small office, but for the families who saw it, it meant the difference between feeling trapped and feeling seen. The city did not transform overnight. Systems rarely do. But by January, Providence municipal officials had begun a pilot coordination process with hospital security and pediatric intake staff for short-term medical loading emergencies. Not perfect, not universal, but real. The kind of bureaucratic tweak that looks boring on paper and life-changing in practice. And then came the letter. It arrived at the courthouse in late March, addressed in large, careful handwriting to Judge Frank Caprio. Courtroom B. Paula Mendes recognized the return address from North Providence and smiled before she even opened it, because some names stay with a clerk long after the docket clears. Inside was a 2-page note from Marisol. She wrote that physical therapy hurt, like getting into an argument with stairs every day. But she was walking short distances with forearm crutches. She wrote that her hair was growing back in weird directions, and that she had finally returned to school for 2 half-days a week, where one teacher let her sit near the radiator because chemo still made her cold. She wrote that Alina had stopped opening envelopes with shaking hands. That line alone said more than any medical update could. Then she wrote the part that made the courthouse cry all over again. "I used to think grown-ups were just people who had more power to ignore things," she said. "Now I think some grown-ups use power to make room, then. KU for making room." Judge Caprio read it aloud in chambers to staff who remembered that morning. And Teresa Malone had to step into the hall afterward because she didn't trust her mascara. Marisol also included a photo. Not glamorous, not staged. She was standing in their kitchen on Douglas Avenue in a green sweatshirt, one crutch under each arm, smiling with only half her mouth because full smiles still made her self-conscious. Behind her, taped to the refrigerator, was a printed sign in black marker, "More birthdays." That photo traveled too, though Alina approved only limited sharing. Not because they wanted attention, because people needed proof. Proof that the story didn't end when the gavel did. Proof that mercy in public can lead to dignity in private. And maybe the most moving update of all came in April, when Nurse Jasmine Patel sent a message saying Marisol had started helping the Child Life team make welcome kits for new oncology patients. Inside each bag she packed peppermint gum, fuzzy socks, a small notebook, lip balm, and a handwritten card that read, "You are not a bill. You are a person. Ask for what you need." That card became famous in a much quieter way than the courtroom clip did. No viral thunder, just repeated use. Kid to kid, family to family, a private revolution in plain language. Like this video, if you believe the strongest people are not always the loudest, because Marisol's greatest moment wasn't just what she said in court. It was what she kept doing after, when far fewer people were watching. Months later, Mia Chen published a follow-up feature that included interviews with Tasha Green and Leonard Pike. Tasha said she had finally contested her own medical zone citation after seeing Marisol's case, and it was dismissed. Leonard said he still kept the old tow receipt in his wallet, but now as a reminder that one person speaking up can turn your private humiliation into public reform. Those secondary victims mattered. They always had. They showed the problem was never isolated. Marisol simply became the voice clear enough for the system to hear. Officer Marino eventually participated in a municipal training session that used the Vega case as a discussion example. He reportedly told the room, "Discretion is not corruption when it is documented and humane." That sentence got repeated among city staff because it solved a fear many officers live with, the fear that compassion equals rule breaking. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's the higher form of competence. Nick Bellamy went further than expected. In June, his company helped sponsor a hospital transportation assistance fund for families in active treatment, modest at first, mostly fuel cards and ride vouchers. He never tried to make himself the hero of the story. He simply kept showing up where repair was needed. That matters too. Redemption is not a speech. It is repetition. As for Alina, the long-term transformation showed up in smaller details that would never trend but meant everything. She took one Saturday off and let herself sleep past noon for the first time in years. She replaced the cracked taillight on the Honda. She stopped saying, if, when talking about next spring and started saying, when. She even laughed once during a physical therapy appointment when Marisol called the resistance bands hospital spaghetti. And Marisol, she changed, but not into some polished, inspirational poster version of herself. She was still sarcastic, still impatient, still 14. She still hated being pitied and still rolled her eyes when adults talked too slowly around her. That authenticity is what made the whole story believable. Real transformation doesn't erase personality, it deepens it. Her school counselor later said the biggest change was that Marisol started raising her hand again. Not in every class, just enough to show she was imagining a future. For kids who have spent months trapped inside survival, that counts as a miracle. There was one final meeting worth telling you about. In late summer, Judge Caprio visited a community event supporting pediatric cancer families in Providence. He wasn't there as a spectacle, just as a familiar face invited to help present grants. Marisol was there too, walking slowly but independently in white sneakers and a yellow sundress with a denim jacket over her shoulders despite the heat. Her hair had grown into soft dark curls that framed her face differently now, stronger somehow. When they saw each other, Judge Caprio smiled and said, "You look taller." Marisol answered, "That's because I'm not sitting in court trying not to throw up." He laughed harder than anyone expected. Then he asked how she was doing really. She thought for a second and said, "Still here." Short, punchy, perfect, the kind of answer that contains whole novels. He told her, "You taught a room full of adults that truth doesn't need volume to have power." She replied, "You listen long enough for it to land." TA. At Exchange never made major headlines, but for the people who heard it, it felt like the full circle. Not hero worship, mutual recognition, a judge willing to hear deeply, a girl willing to speak plainly. That combination is rarer than we like to admit. And this is why stories like this stay with people. Not because they flatter us, because they expose us. They force every viewer to ask a hard question. How many times have I seen someone's attitude and missed their pain? How many rules have I defended without examining who they crush on the way through? How often do we call people difficult when they are simply overloaded, terrified, and trying not to fall apart in public? That's the philosophical heart of it. Justice is not only about punishment, it is about proportion, context, humanity, the willingness to recognize that suffering rarely arrives in neat compliance with policy manuals. Pain doesn't always happen in legal places. Illness doesn't wait in marked zones. Fear does not check the posted signs before taking over a family's life. And maybe the most unforgettable lesson of all came from the girl who started that morning looking tough because she could not afford to look scared. Her transformation wasn't from bad to good. It was from guarded to honest. From fighting to be believed to realizing she no longer had to fight alone. That is a redemption arc too, even if it doesn't look like the usual kind. Sometimes redemption means letting other people carry part of the weight. So when people say Judge Caprio was left speechless, they don't mean he had nothing to say. They mean he encountered the kind of truth that deserves silence before it deserves language. The kind that makes an entire room feel smaller and bigger at once. Smaller because everyone realizes how limited their assumptions were. Bigger because compassion suddenly feels possible again. If you made it this far, drop a comment telling us the moment that hit you hardest. When Marisol said she was scared the bills would get there first. When she read the line about pain not always happening in legal places. Or when she asked the court to fix the system instead of just punish people. Hit that subscribe button if you want more real stories where justice and mercy collide in unforgettable ways. Like this video, if you believe no child should ever have to beg to keep a ride to treatment. And share this with someone who needs the reminder that the strongest truth in the room is often spoken by the person everyone underestimated. Because the next story we cover might make you question everything you thought you knew about guilt, grace, and what happens when one ordinary courtroom becomes the place where a whole city finally learns how to see.